Latitude Group is the premier advisory firm helping high net worth individuals and families navigate second citizenship, citizenship by investment, and global residence. And with me is Christopher Willis, managing partner of Latitude Group, to explain this kind of ever-changing, very dynamic industry. So we're seeing a surge of wealthy Americans looking at second passports, golden visas. What is driving this trend right now?
Yeah. Jane, it's a great question. I mean, what we're seeing now is there's a big degree of uncertainty and worry about Americans, and everyone's got their own tipping point. What's going to push them to say, hey, I need to get another alternative? It doesn't need to get to the point of renouncing, but just saying, I want to have a plan B just in case. And, this could be things from recently we're seeing about the vaccinations. People are worried, what's the impact going to be there? There's obviously the increase of political violence, which is concerning more people. Or it could just be the general vibe of what's happening in the United States, fears of, there being overreach in the government as it relates to assets and all that type of thing. So everybody's got their own particular reasons. Others have visited some of these countries and, feel a little bit more comfortable with the layout. We're seeing this also from the LGBTQ community as well, because, with the sex versus gender narrative that's been coming out, people are saying, look, am I going to be more at risk here, or will my children be more at risk in the United States, or should we look at another jurisdiction where it's maybe a little bit more liberal and welcoming?
Interesting. So it's a combination of politics, finance, kind of hedging your bets, it sounds like. So
absolutely.
Now, which countries are attracting the most interest from U.S. citizens right now?
Well, traditionally, it was Malta. Malta in Europe, because once you became a citizen of Malta, it was 1 equals 27. So you're a citizen of a European Union country, so you have the settlement rights across all 27 member states. So even if you became a citizen of Malta, you could settle in Portugal or Ireland or Scandinavia, France, Germany, take your pick. But Malta went through a bit of a change. There was a European Court of Justice decision which changed the dynamics of the program. So version 3, if you like, of the Malta program is going to be released in the coming weeks. But it'll be more driven by merit as opposed to a transactional nature that was the case in the previous version of the Malta Citizenship Program. So that's getting a lot of people excited. A lot of people were sort of caught in limbo where they had identified Malta as their jurisdiction, had to put the handbrake on, while the program readjusted. So a lot of people are waiting to say, what's version 3 going to be looking like, and how can I apply? So we're expecting that surge. We're seeing New Zealand, which recently announced its Active Investor Plus visa, which is really interesting because it's sort of a hybrid between the two. Because once you make your investment, you have to spend 21 days in New Zealand in the first 3 years. Once you do that, you have your residency for life. So you don't have to go back and do a certain amount of days for every 5-year cycle like you would do for a green card, for example. So you could get your residency and then stay in the US for 10 years, and then you decide you want to go to New Zealand, you can just turn up and you've got your status. So and that's a $3 million investment into a fund in New Zealand, which you must keep there for 3 years. So for some people who want to get some assets out of the United States, this is also an interesting option where they can sort of combine the two objectives. We always see, of course, the Caribbean is always attractive just because it's geographically very close and they have well-established citizenship programs. And Portugal always remains popular, but their processing delays are awful right now. So that's kind of the negative, but it's still very popular with Americans.
Well, I was going to ask about Portugal because they kind of made the golden visa famous, I feel like, a few years ago. Yeah. But things have changed there with Portugal. So has that affected demand for Portugal? Or
well, the demand is there. I mean, the patient person is happy to say, look, I'll get into Portugal and I'll just wait my time, because they see the value of that program. And they may do a second program to complement that. So they may say, hey, I'll get a citizenship in the Caribbean while I wait for Portugal to come through. So, but somebody who's got maybe more time-sensitive matters might look at a different jurisdiction. But you're absolutely right. That was kind of the go-to, right, for many people. But, they were a victim of their own success in many ways.
So what is the Portugal requirements now, and how long is the wait?
Well, the wait right now, just to get your biometrics, is 2 to 3 years, which it used to be 6 months or so. And a lot of that was to do with operational challenges within their processing departments. So without getting too technical, but they kind of, had a bit of a mess internally or operationally for the processing. So now it's pushing 2.5, 3 years, to get the card. But right now you're investing into a fund, typically in Portugal, for €500,000. And then again, depending on the fund that you invest in, you would expect to at least get the return of your capital after the whole period, which is usually between 5 to 7 years.
Okay. Now, do you see this trend accelerating? What would be some of the factors that would make this? I mean, would it be tax policy? I guess the politics, this continued trend that we have been seeing.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in this sort of second iteration of this administration is people first time around were kind of, okay, this is, kind of freaked us out a little bit, but then now they realize version 2 is coming, and it seems people are more concerned that it's actually going to be worse. And again, everyone's got their own tipping point, as I mentioned before. So it's a very personal decision of why people would do this, but it's also making sure that, what's going to trigger them. So for what would upset you might not upset me, and vice versa. So it's still, and so for us, when we speak to our potential clients, it's very much a consultative process, what's driving you, and therefore what program could be the best fit for you. Because there's so many variables out there. We touched on some of them earlier, and, everyone's going to have that one thing that's going to be just too much. Enough is enough.
And it just sounds like people want options.
Exactly.
Whether it's economic or political or, whatever.
So, yeah. And, the Smart Money's done this, and people are looking at this and saying it's kind of the what if, right? But the what if has actually become real life now, right? And, we saw that with COVID, people weren't prepared. When the United States had a travel ban, although it was only short term, it exposed a lot of people who were used to just hopping on a plane and going somewhere. But then they had that restriction. So they said, hey, we have to plug this gap. So let's find a solution to make sure we're not affected like this again in the future.
Okay, Christopher, thank you so much. Always fascinating to talk to you and find out all the dynamics globally, where people are going.
My pleasure. Yeah, always happy to chat to you.